to the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Brian Lomax.
And I'm Josh Berger. And in today's episode, we are going to discuss the 2025 Roland Garros tournament, and in particular, the finals. On the women's side, Coco Gauff beat Aryna Sabalenka 6-7, 6-2, 6-4 for her second major title. And on the men's side, Carlos Alcaraz beat Jannik Sinner 4-6, 6-7, 6-4, 7-6, and 7-6 in the 10-point tiebreaker, in the fifth set. So a lot to talk about. I think we will, primarily be focusing on the finals and the champions and finalists and, talking about some of the different things that we noticed and some of the different themes that emerged throughout the tournaments and in the finals.
Yeah, so why don't we start with the women's final, Josh? Maybe we'll work in a couple of other matches, but I think when we look at what the conditions were on Saturday, they were difficult. A little bit cooler, swirling winds, and I think one of the things that helped Coco in that match was maybe slightly more adaptable to those conditions than Sabalenka. I think Sabalenka's game style obviously thrives in ideal conditions. Probably would have been better if they had been indoors to a certain extent. And I think, a player like Sabalenka, I think she got more frustrated with the conditions and how it was affecting her ball quality and her ability to control the ball. Although I would say that first set, I was really impressed with how Sabalenka closed it. She was extremely effective with using drop shots and that kind of variety, which is not, I wouldn't say she's necessarily known for that, but won a lot of points at net using the drop shot. I felt like she did less of that in the second and third, and maybe that was also a little bit of Coco trying to play a little bit more offense. I think when you play someone who's so great at first strike tennis, one of the things that you want to try to get them to do is play more defense than they want to. And again, that can be a frustration point. But I thought this was it was a very good back and forth match. There were some excellent tactical adjustments from both players. And in the end, it seemed like Coco's ability to make Sabalenka play a few extra balls in difficult conditions. We all know that Sabalenka is an extremely emotional player. Somehow she handles that better than almost anybody in the world. Her ability to get upset about a single thing and then go on a complete tear, like she did in the semifinal against Swiatek when she won the third set 6-0. But in this match, couldn't quite find that. And I think it's almost her frustration boiled over a bit to the point where the game got worse and not necessarily better. And I think you have to give Gauff a lot of credit for that. And although she mentioned in her press conference that she didn't overtly really pay attention to what Sabalenka's behavior was, certainly the game plan fed into trying to increase frustration. And I think it worked to a good extent.
Yeah, I think Coco plays in a way where, she has a little bit more margin in certain ways, right? When the conditions aren't perfect, and they certainly weren't on Saturday in that final. And as you said, Sabalenka probably would have preferred to play indoors or play with, the roof closed. But, it was quite windy. It was tough conditions. And I think, Sabalenka obviously plays in an ultra aggressive way and plays, in a way where when she's on, she's pretty close to unbeatable. She really is. But the issue is, oftentimes conditions aren't going to be perfect. So, Coco did a much better job of adapting to the challenging conditions. She was able to keep her own unforced error count lower. I know Sabalenka had 70 unforced errors over 3 sets, which is quite a bit. And I think it sort of seemed like the frustration was almost just like building
Yeah.
throughout the match, right? That first set was 7-6. It was a battle. I know there was a comeback there, and but then in the second and third sets, Coco was able to turn it around. And yeah, if you just watch Sabalenka's frustration and her body language throughout, I think it wasn't helping her, and I think it led to more errors, and it just felt like maybe she was too focused on some of these things out of her control, like the wind, or like Coco playing great defense and making returning an extra shot or an extra few shots than maybe she's used to in some of her previous matches. And yeah, I think that I think there were different things that could have made the difference, and but I think that emotional piece was definitely one of them. And I think with Coco, it's quite an impressive career arc that she's had in her young career, where she grew up as this player with a lot of expectations on her shoulders, and she was playing in Grand Slam matches, I think at 14, and had a lot of success and a lot of expectations. And yeah, now really seems to be putting it together. She's number 2 player in the world. She now has won her second major, her second major championship. And I actually saw something, I think this was from a few years ago, where she was saying she had a dream about winning the French Open, and sort of going into this tournament. I know she was sort of writing down certain things, like telling herself she was going to win the tournament. So it really seems to be doing the work to put herself in a winning position, and to give herself chances for to win majors like this. So yeah, I think it was a little bit from each of them. Sabalenka, that comeback, to win the to win that semifinal the way that she did against Iga, who's obviously had a tremendous amount of success on clay, and especially at Roland Garros, and to win a 6-love set like that against her is remarkable. And it almost felt like maybe because that happened, that she felt that she could just turn it on in an instant, which frankly she can. But it almost felt like, given the circumstances, given the conditions, given a very different opponent, it was tough for her to do that in that moment.
I like the way you phrased what was going on with Sabalenka as an accumulation of frustrations, and that's normally what happens, any sort of mental breakdown that we see with the player, especially at the pro level, is not going to occur based on one shot. But over time, these things accumulate, and we reach a breaking point. And I was watching the match, and it reminded me of the quote from John Wooden, the Hall of Fame basketball coach and player, that emotionalism leads to inconsistency. And one of the reasons for that, and I think this is what we saw with Sabalenka, is when you become too emotional, it corrupts your ability to make good decisions. And good, and when we know we've done this sort of theme in a bunch of different episodes, a lot of errors are first decision errors. Sometimes they're execution errors. But if you look at a lot of what Sabalenka was doing, they were just not good decisions, which then lead to an error, right? Because the decision to go for a particularly low percentage shot in difficult conditions, maybe in more ideal conditions, that's okay with her because she does play high risk. And as you noted, Josh, 6-0 set versus Swiatek, and incredibly 0 unforced errors, given her game style. So yeah, she can do that, but if we juxtapose the mental games of the two players, Coco continuing to believe in positive things, even though she lost the first. Coco probably more adaptable to difficult conditions. And Sabalenka maybe more fighting the reality of the conditions and accumulation of frustration leading to too much emotionalism. I think one thing that's great about Sabalenka, although I would never coach anybody to act the way she acts, she is able to often use her emotion and channel it forward into playing better, which is, I would say, not normal. Usually people channel it backwards into questioning why they're doing things and making themselves feel bad. She's generally really good at channeling it forward. But when it becomes too much, it's almost like that weapon gets turned on herself. In a certain zone, it's a weapon she can use against her opponent. But if you go beyond that, and this is true, I think, Josh, with almost anything in life, that there's a vice of a lack of something and there's a vice of an excess of something. And where we always have to find whatever we're talking about, whether it's a virtue or a behavior, what does sort of that virtuous mean? What is that optimal zone of functioning? And when we get outside of that with either too little or too much, then we're in trouble. And that's what it seemed to happen to me, that accumulation. It got too far, and she really wasn't able to control her mind and what she was doing in her decision making. I think similar to a few years ago when they played in the US Open final. Conditions there were difficult too, because Sabalenka had to deal with a very pro Coco Gauff crowd in New York. So there's maybe literally 3 people in the whole place rooting for her versus 24,000 not. And especially in that third set, get quite loud. So I think Coco also had the experience of knowing if you can push Sabalenka beyond a certain point with her frustration, you have a really good chance. And I think the game plan that was used on Saturday really catered to that. And good for Coco to do that. I think this is, as she said, she thought this was the best. This would be her best Grand Slam, right? Playing on clay. And now that she's got this title, it's fantastic for her.
Absolutely. I actually wanted to include a quote from Coco Gauff, where she said, which kind of about the wind and conditions and the adaptability piece, which was, when I stepped on the court, I was aware of the wind. Gauff said of the weather conditions on Saturday. We both practiced with the roof closed, so I honestly wanted the roof to be closed before the match because my quarterfinal and semifinal, it was closed, and I thought I was playing good tennis. But when I found out it was open, I saw how windy it was on the court. I knew it was going to be an ugly win. So, this idea that she knew, okay, these are the conditions. I know I have to play in a certain way. I know I have to win ugly if I'm going to, find a way to win this match. And yeah, it seemed like, more than anything, she was able to be adaptable. She was able to, make the changes necessary. And on the other side with Sabalenka, it was frustrating, right? And she plays in maybe a lower margin way where maybe it's harder to do that. Maybe it's harder to fully adapt without, giving up sort of her own playing style or who she is as a player, which I get that, everyone's different in that way. But Gauff seemed to do a much, much better job of adapting to the conditions. So kudos to her. And it seemed like, Sabalenka was maybe a little bit too focused on her own play and I think that came across in the press conference a little bit, that she was maybe too focused on her own mistakes and not focused enough on the fact that her opponent was making it tough for her to play well. Yes, the weather was also, but I think, her opponent playing great defense, adding more spin, adjusting was making it really tough as well. So I think there's a lesson there that, especially in tough conditions, it's about finding a way. It's about winning ugly. It's about finding a way. It's not just about saying, okay, this is how I play and I'm going to play this way regardless. It's about, okay, this is my A game, but maybe sometimes I need to make adjustments. Maybe sometimes I need to use that B or B plus game in order to find a way here, in order to truly battle and to, find some sort of way to get over the finish line.
Yeah, or shrink the court.
Mm-hmm.
Right, you can still hit big, and we've probably all been in a situation where we're playing on that windy, difficult day, And what happens? The quality of your ball striking is less than it normally is.
Yep.
And that can then feed into some doubt, like, all right, what's going on? This doesn't feel good. And I think Coco's perhaps mental preparation before the match, telling herself that, okay, this is going to be ugly, was probably a very effective approach, such that she could accept the ugliness of it. And maybe she was able to accept the ugliness of it more so than her opponent. And I think that's a really good bit of mental preparation. We all know that tennis is not easy. It becomes much harder when you're playing in difficult conditions, when it's cool, it's a swirling wind, and any sort of expectations that we bring to the court of, oh, I don't like the wind, or my game doesn't feel good out here, is only going to harm your mental fortitude during the match. And so Coco didn't do that. She brought an attitude of, okay, it is what it is. This is probably going to be ugly, and I'm okay with it. I'm okay with that. And, growing up in Florida on clay, often windy, especially in the spring, probably not unusual conditions for someone like her, from South Florida. So really great credit to her for understanding what the match conditions would be like and being really adaptable and being absolutely okay with this not being a pretty win per se. But we've probably said this before, this is not figure skating, right? There's no artistic expression score. You don't get extra points for looking beautiful. It's all a matter of who can win 2 sets first. And that's the mission.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Coco, kudos to her for being mission focused and finding a way to get it done in tough circumstances, right? Players have their own playing styles, but both players have to deal with those circumstances, the wind, right? I think it's easy to forget that the other player is dealing with it too, right? Maybe they're on the other side of the court and the wind can be gusting, or the wind can be going in one direction, maybe help, one side of the court more than the other, but obviously you're switching ends every 2 games and both players are impacted by it. And I think it can be easy to forget about that at times.
For sure. Shall we transition to the men's final?
Yes.
We'll let you go first, Josh. What were your kind of initial impressions of Alcaraz and Sinner?
I mean, it was quite a match, to say the least. 5 hours, 29 minutes. A lot of twists and turns, obviously, with Sinner really being in control at the start of, first 2 sets, really, even going into the 3rd set, and, Alcaraz coming back. And then in that 4th set, serving at 3-5, love 40, and saving those 3 match points, coming back, finding a way to win that tiebreaker. And then in the 5th set, again, a lot of back and forths. He served for the match. Alcaraz served for the match, wasn't able to do it, and then came back and played an exceptional 10-point tiebreak. So, I think there's a lot to say here, but, start by saying quite a battle, right? Going into this final, Alcaraz was 4-0 in major finals. Sinner was 3-0, which is really a testament to each of them, just how they have risen to the occasion. I think they both rose to the occasion in this match, in this final, but somebody has to win it and somebody has to lose it. Ultimately, Sinner ended up winning 1 more point in the match than Alcaraz, but obviously that's not how tennis results are determined. And Alcaraz won the biggest points. He won the tiebreakers, and he won that was 4th and 5th set tiebreakers. He saved those match points when he needed to. He was, ultimately just a bit better when he needed it most. So I think there's a lot to say here, but wanted to get some of your thoughts on it.
I mean, I concur with everything that you've said there. saw an infographic in the Spanish newspaper El País where it showed the probability of each player winning the match as it went along. And much of the match, it's really in Sinner's favor, getting all the way to 99% at that when there were those 3-match points. And so Alcaraz all the way down to 1%, based on a service that they were using to calculate that. But then he comes back and it gets back to 50% at the end of the 4th set. And then throughout the 5th, it looks like it's a little bit more in favor of Alcaraz. And then toward the end of the 5th, it's a little bit for Sinner. And then, as you said, Alcaraz played an amazing 10-point tiebreaker. I actually thought, Josh, he played almost flawless tennis from 5-6, 30 all. Sinner hit a couple winners where, he was in a good position again, but I don't know that, I don't think Alcaraz made a mistake really from 5-6, 30 all on. And to me, it was almost like the most clutch performance I've ever seen, because Sinner was actually playing better again. They didn't start off the 5th grade. He was looking a little physically like there might have been some cramp issues or something, but he kept himself in the set more or less to then break. And then he almost looked like his body relaxed and he started really serving better again. The shots were flowing. It made me think of this quote from the book, The Fighter's Mind, where there's a chapter on an ultra-marathoner. And he has this very confusing statement of, it never always gets worse. So Sinner, he didn't just get worse and worse physically. He actually bounced back and was looking pretty fresh at the end of the 5th. And Alcaraz won that match. Sinner didn't lose it. You could say that Sinner didn't play great when he had those 3-match points. That would be fair. He missed a relatively easy second serve return. He missed a pretty easy forehand in the net. But he still had the opportunity to serve out the match. Didn't play a great game there either. The remarkable thing is, if we look at that chance of winning, Alcaraz was down to 1%. And this is the beauty of tennis. There's no clock. And your chances of winning are never zero as long as the match is still in contention. And I know you have a quote, Josh. I'd love for you to read it. But I also heard an interview with Alcaraz on Radio Nacional de España, where he talked about he never lost belief, no matter what the score was. He always believed he could win the match. And similar to what we had said in our episode a few episodes ago about the benefits of positive affect, that he was intentionally keeping himself positive in those moments. So if you go back and you look at the end of that 4th set, and even when he was down those 3-match points, there's no drop in his body language there. He is still walking with energy. He's still like the Carlos Alcaraz that we all know. And it just, even though we all know we should keep fighting till the end, it's hard to do that. Hard to do that when you're playing a guy like Sinner, who is so good, and you're down 3-match points. Yet he did it. I mean, this is like such a fairy tale, epic, hero's journey victory. It's got to be one of the best, most dramatic matches that tennis has seen. I think, we look at Medvedev and Nadal from a few years ago at the Australian Open, where Nadal was down to a 6% chance and came back and won. But this is 1%. So can we all learn to believe, no matter what the score is, no matter who you're playing, that you can come back and do that? And not only did he come back, but he raised his level even at the end. That's why I thought it was the most clutch performance I've ever seen Josh, because Sinner didn't do anything wrong in that tiebreaker. It was more or less okay. He just hit another winner. That's what else can I do? So super impressive victory. I don't know that we've ever really seen a closing performance like that in tennis.
It was definitely something different. It absolutely was. And I actually wanted to go back to something that you said, right? That belief that you can win, right? To me, it doesn't mean that I believe that I am going to win.
Yeah, or I
right?
will win, right? That's different.
Yeah. And it's tough to believe that when you're down 2 sets in a break to somebody who's been as dominant as Sinner over the last year and a half or so, right? Or being down 2 sets to 1 and 3-5 love 40 when the odds makers or the computer would say you have a 1% chance, right? It's really tough to, I don't think it's necessarily, I don't think people would necessarily think, okay, I will win in this situation. But I think the ability to think that you can win, that it's possible, hey, I can win, I could win this match, is critical, but much easier said than done, right? We can talk about it here, right? We can give tips or suggestions, but doing it in the moment is obviously incredibly difficult. And I think I know we've talked about this a lot in the past, but one of the things that makes that possible is the nature of the tennis scoring system, where regardless of what the score is, one player starts winning points and the other player starts losing points, the match will turn around. You can't run the clock out. You can't take a knee. You can't, no matter how much you're ahead, right? You can be, in a best of 3 set match, you can be up 6-0, 5-0, 40 love. The other player starts winning points. That other player is going to win the match. So, and it's really easy to take things for granted, right? You might hear commentators say, jump to conclusions, jump to assumptions. It's easy when people are on the court to jump to assumptions or conclusions that a match is going to go a certain way based on what the score is in that moment. And logically, it almost makes sense to assume that result is going to happen, but we never actually know. And again, the player can be at that 1% chance, but if they catch fire, and Alcaraz definitely had moments where he caught fire, and the other player doesn't even need to let their level drop that much because it's more about when those points actually take place, right? Okay, Alcaraz is at love 40. He still has a decent chance to win a game where he's serving at love 40. Right. Okay. He finds some sort of way to win that game. Okay, now Sinner's serving for it at 5-4. Everybody who plays the sport knows that it's not easy to close out a match, right? And then we're adding on, okay, so you're trying to close out a match against Alcaraz. And then we're adding on, okay, we're trying to close out a match against Alcaraz in a Grand Slam final, right? So just all these different factors, and it's somehow that 1% goes to 5%, goes to 10%, and then the next thing you know, he's broken at 3-5, he's held at 3-5 somehow from love 40. He's broken at 4, at when Sinner was serving at 5-4, finds a way to win that tiebreaker, and then all of a sudden they're in a fifth set, and it's anybody's match. And I did want to go back to that quote. So there was a quote from Alcaraz from his post-match interview. And the quote was, sort of about asking him about, how he handled those match points and came back in the way that he did. And he said, I just believe all the time. I have never doubted myself. Even though in those match points down, I thought just 1 point at a time, just 1 point. And then after 1 point, try to save that game and keep believing. That's what I thought. And again, that might sound basic, right? Sort of this almost like cliche idea of, it's never over, or keep believing. But, I think there's a lot of truth there that he clearly bought into that. He clearly did keep believing. I don't think there's any way that you could come back in the way that he did if he didn't, right? And again, that doesn't mean that he believed that he would win it when the odds were stacked against him in the way that they were. But the fact that he could win this match. And I think believing that you can win it in that situation when you're down the way that you are can really make all the difference. And it did. And yeah, I think, really says a lot about the player that he is, and just so impressive that he was able to rise to the occasion in those toughest moments.
It makes me think about a learning process that we use, maybe in philosophy, but we can also use in sports psychology, which is we take theory, we put it into practice, and then we look to master it, right? So theory to practice to mastery. So we all get the theory. You just covered it, Josh, right? You're never out of it. It's hard to close matches. 1% does not equal 0%. Then we've got to practice that. And sometimes we'll do it well and sometimes we won't. And so, through our practice, we figure out, okay, what's working, what needs work. And I'm sure Carlos has had this over the span of his career, because they're probably, if we go back, he's a young guy, but if we go back to maybe like it was 15, put him in that same situation, maybe that Carlos Alcaraz version doesn't come through, doesn't believe in himself. But we continue to practice the theory. We continue to bring that perspective. It's never over. Never stop believing in yourself. And then we arrive, hopefully, at some point where we have mastered that. And I mentioned to you before we started recording, I'm working on a new book. There's a chapter in the book about self-mastery, and I happen to be editing it yesterday. And I'm reading it, and I'm thinking to myself, this Carlos Alcaraz example is like the epitome of a guy who has learned self-mastery. Self-mastery really being about the ability to control your behavior and how you respond to situations around you that are, generally out of your control, and doing it in such a way that whatever you do next is the most important thing you need to do next. And, simply playing one point at a time, that's what was important in that moment for him. And so to me, when we look at this Alcaraz performance, we can talk about the tennis and raising his level and the clutch piece. But to me, one of the most important parts here is he has learned the skill of self-mastery. He's learned to, as you got in that quote, never stop believing. Hard to do, right? That's the theory. We have to practice it. Eventually, we hope to master it. Carlos has gotten to a place where, at least on this day, he displayed that self-mastery. And that was really what I was most impressed with, Josh, because we both know how hard this is. And you mentioned all the circumstances around this. It's a Grand Slam final. It's Roland Garros. It's a big tournament for both of them. Carlos is the defending champion there. He's never lost a Grand Slam final. Interestingly enough, on the TNT broadcast in the States, at one point they showed that Alcaraz had never come back from 2 sets down, and that Sinner had never won a match over 4 hours.
Yep.
So somebody was going to set a first there, and they were both pretty close to doing it. So that was kind of maybe the last thing I wanted to cover with Alcaraz, is this idea of theory to practice to mastery, really arriving at a place of self-mastery, and that being a major key to his win.
I like that. I think that absolutely makes sense. I think the piece with Sinner, and again, easy to overlook everything that he did well, because he came out on the wrong side of it, right? He ended up losing, but he was so close. And, I think it's easy to forget that I think, just around a month ago, he was still out. He came back for one tournament for Rome, after, a few months suspension, came back for Rome, got to the finals, lost also to Alcaraz, and, had lower expectations going into this. And to be as close as he was, I think it really says a lot about him. And just, really a mature, I would say just a very mature, um, he handled the loss in quite a mature way. All credit to Alcaraz. A lot of it just seemed like there was a lot of acceptance around it, right? Just understanding, Alcaraz played better in those bigger moments. Um, but again, I think a lot of credit needs to go to him for the tournament that he had, and it'll be interesting going into Wimbledon, which this time of the tennis season is always really exciting with two, Grand Slams within a very short amount of time. But yeah, going into Wimbledon, which, he hasn't maybe gone as far in the tournament, but I think with his game and the way he's playing, you'd think he would definitely be one of the top contenders there. So it'll be interesting to see how he can do there. And then, he's won the last three hardcourt majors, the last two Australian Opens and the last US Open. So I think he'll probably be the favorite, or maybe Alcaraz at the US Open. So yeah, I think, I would expect him to be able to bounce back from this and, you know, show what he's capable of the remainder of the season.
I would concur that his reaction to the loss was extremely mature. He also noted that he was very satisfied that his level had improved since Rome. And I think that that was something that he wanted to carry throughout the summer. Of course, trying to, as he said, delete the rest of it, the sort of sad part of it, and just kind of move forward, knowing that he's playing better. And now that he's back, as you said, Josh, he had a great tournament. I mean, he pretty much handled Novak Djokovic without too much drama there. I would say that in some regard, he's kind of in Djokovic's head a little bit, because Novak, if you were to go back and watch the video, made a lot of decision errors, which is not normal for him. He normally is the super disciplined guy, but in that match, not so much. So I think he's playing well, and I think you're right. I mean, it's probably a toss-up of who will be the favorite for the U.S. Open, but would we say no to a rematch? I don't think so. I mean, that would be the match I think everybody would want to see. I mean, maybe American fans want an American player. I don't really care about that. I'd rather see Sinner and Alcaraz, and kind of get the same sort of scintillating tennis that we got this past weekend, because they're clearly the two best players right now, and I think their game styles bring out it brings out a good performance from both of them. So, yeah, I'm not sure about Wimbledon, because you're right, grass is a whole different beast, and Sinner, I don't think is shown that yet, but who knows? Maybe this will be the year. But I'm looking forward to sort of post Wimbledon, that hard court season, going into the U.S. Open, and really ending the Grand Slam or major calendar sometime in September.
Absolutely. No, it'll definitely be a fun next, summer and next few months. I think, yeah, I know you mentioned Djokovic. Impressive tournament for him, getting to the semifinals, right? Losing to Sinner in three close sets, beating Zverev, and seemed to almost wave goodbye
Yeah.
at the end. Not sure if, whether that will be a goodbye to the Roland Garros fans. He obviously had his Olympic triumph last year at the same tournament, at the same stadium. But yeah, that'll be interesting to see how he can bounce back, and whether the end is near. Whether I think him and Nadal and Federer have all shown time after time that they can come back from situations that people probably don't assume that they will. So, would not be surprised if he ends up playing for a good bit longer and winning a good bit more as well. So that'll be interesting to see. Also on the women's side, we talked about Iga a little bit, this being her tournament, in recent years, but losing to Sabalenka and losing that third set the way that it was, where Sabalenka really caught fire. So it'll be interesting with Iga. She was the number one player in the world for a while. Then it dropped to number 2. And I think after this tournament, she's going to be down to, she was the number 5 seed. Yeah. Exactly. Now she's going to be down to 7. So it'll be interesting to see what she can do. Can she get her ranking back? Can she sort of find that, maybe that mojo that has been lost a little bit? And, at this level, the margins are so slim that it doesn't take much, where, if you slip even just a little bit, somebody else is taking your spot. So it'll be interesting to see if she can, bounce back and be that dominant force that she has been in recent years.
For sure. So that's our Roland Garros 2025 wrap up. Thank you all for listening. For more on today's episode, please check out the show notes. If you have any feedback or questions for the two of us, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you are enjoying the content that Josh and I discuss on the show, please rate and review the podcast so other tennis enthusiasts can find it more easily. Additionally, to be notified of new episodes, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube. And you can also check us out on Instagram. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.